self-proclaimed victims, real aggressors. We're talking about something that's echoed through thousands of years of history and still ripples through our lives in powerful ways. The mindset of self-proclaimed victimhood. That pattern where individuals or entire groups start seeing themselves as perpetual targets of harm, even when the threats are just words, passive slights, or echoes from the distant past. And when it escalates, it flips the script. Suddenly, those perceived victims claim the moral right to strike back hard, sometimes in brutal or even criminal ways, all framed as self-defense or righteous revenge. We've pulled together research from ancient patterns to modern sociology to see how this plays out not just in personal minds but in the fabric of whole societies. Think blood feuds from Mesopotamia thousands of years ago or mythic cycles of grievance that fueled epic wars. We'll look at how these old scripts still operate today, and more importantly, what happens when this mindset seeps into every layer of a culture, education, law, media, institutions, and starts reshaping power itself. Before we dive deeper into this profound exploration, a quick heartfelt note. If any historical insight or revelation here stirs something within you, please comment, share this episode, and follow for more thought-provoking discussions ahead. Picture this. What if a society slowly normalizes the idea that moral worth comes mainly from who has suffered the most? What if groups start competing fiercely for that victim status, and anyone who questions it gets branded as the new attacker? That's the teaser of where we're headed, ancient roots leading to modern risks, with some logical forecasts about how it could unravel or strengthen a community depending on how we handle it. Let's start with the foundations because this isn't some new fad. Go back 4,000 years or more, and you see the same dynamics baked into early human groups. In tribal and early state societies like those in the ancient Near East, any harm to one person, a killing, an insult, even a theft became a collective wound on the whole clan. The Code of Hammurabi and similar laws didn't just punish the offender. They codified revenge as a sacred duty. Blood guilt passed down through families, turning minor slights into multi-generational vendettas. It wasn't about personal justice. It was sociological glue holding the group together through shared grievance, while justifying endless retaliation. The logic was simple. If you're the victim, your response isn't aggression, it's restoration. Fast forward to ancient Greece in the Homeric epics, and the Trojan War myth boils down to the same thing. One perceived dishonor spirals into total destruction, all rationalized as collective self-defense against an eternal wrong. These patterns weren't random. Sociologically, they served functions. They reinforced group identity, deterred outsiders, and created a clear us versus them worldview. But the downside? They trapped societies in cycles of low trust and high conflict. No room for negotiation when every passive slight feels like an existential attack. And this isn't limited to the distant past. Chosen traumas, those selected historical wounds that groups weave into their core identity, show up again and again. Whether it's an ancient defeat turned into a sacred narrative of martyrdom or an exile remembered as divine injustice, these stories get passed down through rituals, stories, and education. They bind the group tightly, creating solidarity, but they also lock in an external locus of control. Our fate is always shaped by those outside forces, not our own choices. Over centuries, this fosters what researchers call collective victimhood, where the past harm defines the present so completely that empathy for others shrinks, and any new interaction gets filtered through the lens of, they're probably attacking us again. Now, here's where sociology really lights up the picture. In what scholars like Campbell and Manning describe as the rise of victimhood culture, we see a shift from older honor-based systems, where you handled slights yourself with direct response, to dignity cultures that emphasize self-restraint and private resolution. But victimhood culture flips it again. Moral status now flows to those who can convincingly claim oppression or harm. Sensitivity to even verbal or symbolic offenses skyrockets. And the solution? Appeal to third parties, authorities, institutions, the public court of opinion, for validation and punishment. It's not about personal strength or inner worth anymore. It's about broadcasting your marginalization to gain sympathy and leverage. The core argument here is structural. When victimhood becomes the currency of moral worth, it creates incentives for competitive victimhood. Groups don't just acknowledge their pain. They compete to prove theirs is greater, more exclusive, more deserving of redress. This isn't abstract psychology, it's sociology in action. It reduces empathy across lines, minimizes the suffering of outgroups, and turns every disagreement into a moral battlefield. Intractable conflicts thrive on it because each side clings to the belief that they alone are the true victims, making reconciliation feel like betrayal of the group's sacred narrative. Let's reason through what this looks like when it scales up and subverts a society at every level. Imagine a culture where this mindset permeates institutions. Education starts teaching history primarily through the lens of chosen traumas, framing every generation as inheritors of perpetual victim status rather than agents of their own future. Media and public discourse reward those who amplify grievances, turning minor policy debates into accusations of systemic attack. Law and governance begin prioritizing protection of self-proclaimed victims over equal application of rules, because questioning a victim's claim risks labeling you the aggressor. Over time, speaking up against the dominant victim narrative gets reframed as violence itself, a passive or verbal assault that justifies silencing, shunning, or institutional punishment. Dissent isn't debate. It's an attack on the vulnerable, so it must be outlawed or pathologized to defend the collective. Logically, this creates a feedback loop of power concentration. Certain groups, whether ideological factions, identity clusters, or organized movements, learn to weaponize the phenomenon for immense influence. By positioning themselves as the ultimate representatives of victimhood, they gain moral elitism. Their actions, even aggressive ones, become justified as self-defense or restorative balance. They capture key institutions not through open competition in a free market of ideas, but by framing opposition as perpetuating harm. Critics get cast as part of the eternal attacker class, so their voices are marginalized under the banner of justice. In extreme scenarios, this leads to a soft form of control where the state or dominant coalitions enforce orthodoxy. Policies favor grievance-based redistribution over merit or innovation, eroding the incentives that drive free market dynamism. Economic stagnation follows because an external locus of control discourages personal initiative. Why build or risk when the system is rigged against us? Social fragmentation deepens as competitive victimhood pits subgroups against each other in a zero-sum scramble for status and resources. Forecast a few different paths with clear logic. In one scenario, the subversion stays contained but corrosive. Societies see rising polarization, where trust in neutral institutions collapses because everything is viewed through grievance filters. Free inquiry suffers, research, art, or speech that challenges the victim script gets suppressed as harmful, slowing cultural and technological progress. Over generations, this could hollow out resilience, making the society vulnerable to real external shocks because internal cohesion relies on shared victim identity rather than shared agency. Another path. Groups exploit it deliberately for power consolidation. A faction adopts the rhetoric of perpetual victimhood, rallies support by promising to punish the attackers, and gradually bends rules, laws, and norms in their favor. Dissenters face social or legal consequences, framed as necessary protection. The result? A disguised form of authoritarianism, where control is sold as empathy and the free market of ideas is replaced by managed narratives. History shows this pattern in how ancient empires or medieval clans use grievance myths to justify expansion or purges. Scaled up, it risks turning vibrant, adaptive societies into rigid, declining ones. But there's a third logical outcome if societies push back: renewal through balance. When institutions emphasize dignity, personal responsibility, equal rules, and internal locus of control, victimhood claims get tested against evidence rather than accepted on faith. Competitive dynamics fade as common identities, like shared humanity or citizenship, take precedence. Free market principles reward agency over grievance, fostering innovation and reducing the appeal of external blame. Blood feud cycles broke historically when centralized justice replaced kin revenge. Modern parallels suggest strong rule of law and open discourse can interrupt modern versions. To ground this, consider some key insights from the research. As Campbell and Manning put it in their analysis of moral cultures, victimhood culture highlights oppression and social marginalization while downplaying inner worth or strength, creating a recipe for constant moral conflict as people compete for victim status. Or take the idea of chosen traumas from collective memory studies. These narratives become inseparable from group identity, persisting over centuries and shaping how current rivals are viewed as heirs to ancient oppressors. One scholar noted that when groups internalize exclusive victim beliefs, it reduces willingness to acknowledge their own side's role in conflicts, perpetuating the cycle. Another pointed out that competitive victimhood isn't just emotional. It's strategic, used to defend moral image, restore agency, and gain power, but at the cost of empathy and reconciliation. So what do we do with all this? The recommendations aren't about ignoring real harm, genuine victimization demands justice, but about preventing self-proclaimed perpetual victimhood from becoming the default script. For individuals caught in it, building agency through small wins, reframing narratives from victim to survivor, and practicing gratitude or forgiveness breaks the rumination loop. Sociologically, the bigger levers are cultural and institutional. Prioritize education that teaches critical thinking over grievance immersion, strengthen neutral rule of law that treats all claims with equal scrutiny, and foster inclusive identities that value contribution over suffering. Encourage free market competition in ideas, where bad arguments lose on merit rather than moral blackmail. Communities thrive when they reward resilience and internal control instead of external blame. In the end, history and logic both show that victimhood mindsets, while binding in the short term, erode societies when they dominate unchecked. They turn potential partners into perpetual enemies and replace agency with helplessness. But by spotting the patterns early, chronic rumination on ancient wrongs, moral elitism in public discourse, appeals to silence critics, we can choose a different path. One where real justice coexists with personal power, and societies build upward instead of tearing down in endless revenge. Thanks for joining me on this one, folks. Keep building, and stay curious about the forces shaping us all. Refuse the victimhood. Stay free.